I am Kimberly, the 5-Minute NP. The 5-Minute NP was born out of my belief that small, incremental changes can drastically change the trajectory of your life. Our genes do not have to determine our lifespan. My goal through this podcast is to act as a roadmap that bridges the gap between knowledge and action, leading to you living your healthiest, happiest, longest life. Welcome to the 5-Minute NP podcast. Hello, welcome to this episode of the 5-Minute NP podcast with me, Kimberly Hefner. Happy to be back after a break and happy to share this interview I had with Dr. Robert J. Davis, author of Supersized Lies. Dr. Davis has authored 3 previous health books, hosts the Healthy Skeptic video series, which dissects the science behind popular health claims, and he is an award-winning health journalist whose work has been featured on CNN, PBS, WebMD, and in the Wall Street Journal. In this episode, we discussed the supersized lies we have been fed throughout the years about diet and weight loss, such as you need to count calories, cut carbs, exercise more, eat healthier, eat earlier, skip meals, drink apple cider vinegar, drink more water, exercise more, take supplements. Well, he sheds light on what his years of research has shown and what really has been proven to work. What I loved about his book, Supersized Lies, is that after each chapter, he provides real action steps that we can implement right away. It was my honor to interview him. Well, I just want to thank you for listening to the podcast, and feel free to share it with others if you find it helpful. My goal is truly to help you live longer, happier, and healthier. Welcome to the 5-Minute NP podcast. All right. Hello, Robert. Looking forward to talking with you today about your new book, or I know it probably has been out for a little while, but it's new to me, Supersized Lies. And so I thought we would get started with just hearing a little bit about you, your background, and what led you to studying nutrition, weight loss, and the association of all the misinformation surrounding both of them.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. And, I've been a health journalist for many years, covering all aspects of health and wellness. I'm particularly interested in nutrition and fitness and weight loss. And that comes from a personal experience I've had. I've long had a personal passion when it comes to health. I'm an avid exerciser. I'm very careful about what I eat, and that extends all the way back to college. So that's really driven a lot of the work that I do. Also, I have an academic background in public health, training in epidemiology and public health. So what I try to do is to bring in my academic training and also my personal passions too, to look at information surrounding diet and fitness and wellness, and really dig into the science and help people understand what's true and what's not. Because, there's so much, we all know, conflicting information, confusing information around these areas. And so what I try to do is to look at the science as honestly and thoroughly as I can, to lay out what we know and what we don't know, and to help readers and viewers make better decisions for themselves.
You had plenty of information, I'll tell you that much, plenty to base it on. Was there anything that surprised you during the research for your book?
One thing, and I wouldn't say, I don't know if it really is a surprise, but it's certainly something I learned more as I was researching this book. And I've always appreciated anecdotally from friends and family members and others and what they deal with emotionally with regard to their weight, people who've struggled with their weight for decades or their entire lives. But in writing this book and really interviewing people and understanding, hearing firsthand, and people were very open and very honest, which I deeply appreciated, and hearing their stories, which I have in the book, just about the psychological and emotional harm that their struggles have caused, and what the struggle, and particularly the misinformation from the diet industry, the idea that all they have to do is to eat less and exercise more, and if they simply do that, they should lose weight. And if that doesn't work, it's their fault. They've done something wrong. There's something wrong with them. They're not diligent enough. And how people internalize this idea and engage in sort of self-stigma, and they have this shame and self-blame and these negative emotions, and how harmful that is to their overall emotional health, and how that interferes with their ability to live a healthy life. And so I think in writing the book, I gained a much greater appreciation for the struggle that so many people have, and the damage that diet culture is really causing for so many people on so many levels.
You're so right about that, and the influence of those emotions and how it affects our ability to lose weight, sleep, and how it all interrelates, it interconnects, and it just makes it even harder and harder when you start talking about hormones and the effects of all that. And you go through that in your book, which is awesome, because once you kind of get that understanding and you can start making those changes and implementing it in your life, I think the hope of being more successful is there.
Absolutely. And again, I agree with you completely that all these things tie together. And when people do have this kind of emotional harm that's caused by diet culture that causes them to fixate on the scale, to fixate on calories, and then to do that at the exclusion of their health. And so what happens is not only are they not able to focus on their health because they're focusing on other metrics, but then when these measures don't work, they're less able to focus on these other very important elements of good health that you just described.
Right. Well, in your book, Supersized Lies, I love the first chapter. And it was just like a walk down memory lane, actually, of all the different diets throughout the years that, has been the craze. And I'm sure most people have tried probably all of them. So it was interesting to me how you discussed them and provided, evidence and statistics on, well, were they really effective? Did they really work? What was the true outcome or the sustainable weight loss of each of them? I found that to be really interesting. Well, in your opinion, which one was the most successful or not successful? I'm thinking like, maybe the keto diet or, the paleo diet, or just what are your thoughts?
Well, let's take the keto diet. That's an interesting example. Or just let's talk about low carb diets in general, because
Okay.
I talk in the book, I start with talking about low fat diets. And we know go all the way back to the 70s and into the 80s and into the 90s. That was the way to go that was recommended. Just eat less fat and you'll be less fat was sort of the simple message we got, that fat is the major contributor to weight gain. Well, what happened? People cut back on their fat. The market was flooded with all these fat-free and low-fat products, processed foods. What happened? Not only did people not lose weight, they actually gain weight. And then we continued to the obesity epidemic got worse. And we had an epidemic of diabetes on top of that. So then people turned from there. You had Dr. Atkins came along and sort of the Atkins craze. And Robert Atkins said, well, it's not the fat, it's the carbs. So just cut back on carbs. That's the solution. So people gravitated toward the Atkins diet, and then all kinds of cousins of that diet that are basically low carb, the keto diet being the ultimate sort of version of that, where you cut carbs way, way, way back, and said, okay, carbs are the enemy. And so what we know about the keto diet, and I'll just focus on the science there, is that it can help people lose weight, as can a low fat diet, but the key is that in the short term. So people plenty of people swear by these diets, and certainly the keto diet, they swear by this diet, they lose weight in the short term. And there's some evidence that this kind of very low carb diet may work better in the short term than other diets to help you take the weight off. The problem is that the keto diet, like other diets, are not sustainable for most people over the long term, because they involve great sacrifice. They require you to cut out large categories of foods, most fruits, grains, some vegetables. And so that's something that most people cannot sustain over the long term. Plus, we know about weight regulation is it's far more complicated than just a simple one category of food. I know there are complicated explanations about about insulin and so forth, and how carbohydrates affect insulin, the carbohydrate insulin model, as it's called, and it sounds compelling. But the truth is that we do not have ironclad evidence that that's really the true mechanism when it comes to weight loss. The proponents say that there is evidence, but in truth, it's not really there nearly as strongly as they say. So the point there is that what any of these diets do, including the keto diet, is they take a very complex phenomenon, try to simplify it to one category of foods and say, here's the solution. Oh, and you have to do this the rest of your life, which most people are not going to be able to do, obviously. And if it doesn't work, it's your fault because you weren't compliant with the diet. So I think that right there, to me, that's sort of a summary of what's wrong with these kinds of approaches that take a specific category of food, a villain, as it were, and turn that into the focus of the diet.
I'm thinking about this when you talked about in the book, our body, you talked about what's that show, The Biggest Loser,
Yeah.
and how they lost all this weight. I mean, what they went through and how they gained it back, and how you just kind of discussed about our body has a set point or a weight it wants to be at. And actually doing these diets can decrease our metabolism slowing things down, making it even harder. Could you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a great point. Our bodies, we have this evolutionary gift. It's an amazing thing, and what it is it allows us to survive in times of scarcity and famine. And so what happens is when the body senses, uh-oh, calories are reducing, you're not getting enough food, metabolism slows down, so essentially we become more fuel efficient. Now, that's a great thing if we're in sort of ancient civilizations or times past when we didn't have access to food. But fortunately, and for most of us in the kind of life we live today, we have plenty of food. So this gift, this evolutionary gift, which is intended to protect us, becomes an impediment when it comes to weight loss, because what happens is as we start to lose weight, the body senses something's wrong, and it does various things, including slowing the metabolism down to cause weight to come back on. And as you point out, what even happens is when somebody goes from, say, 200 pounds to 150 pounds, their metabolism slows down even more than at 150 pounds than if they had started at 150 pounds, and stays slowed for a lengthy period of time. And so that makes it even harder to lose weight or to keep the weight off, because you have to ratchet down the number of calories more and more and more, or increase your exercise to a large extent more and more and more to burn more calories. So it becomes difficult. So that's the kind of complexity with regard to biology that's often not revealed when it comes to some of these recommendations we get about, oh, it's simply just eat fewer calories and you'll lose weight.
Right. And I thought we would talk about like public enemy number one, sugar, and what, sugar's in everything. And you kind of do a great job discussing sugar. What are your thoughts on sugar, soda, and other forms of sugar like found in fruit in regards to weight loss?
Yeah, well, there's some people that will swear again that sugar is the number one enemy when it comes to weight loss, and it's all about cutting back on sugar. That's become sort of another villain. Now, that said, sugar is not a good thing. Most of us get too much sugar. There's lots of sugar in our diets, particularly hidden kinds of sugar and all kinds of things that we don't know, that we don't, unless you read the labels, that there's sugar there. So it's a good idea just for our overall health to cut back on sugar. And to be aware of the amount of sugar we're getting in our diets. And certainly sugar is one contributor to weight gain and obesity, but it's not the only one or necessarily the most important one. So I think, again, what matters here is not one particular ingredient or constituent or category of food. It is the overall quality of our diets that really matter. So I think that, we hear often that soda, for example, that the key to reducing obesity, we have a lot of talk among obesity experts and public health people, is just to cut back on soda. Again, that's good. People drink too much soda generally, so it's fine to cut back on soda. I'm all for that. But when the focus becomes exclusively soda, that this is the end all be all, this will, curb the obesity epidemic. If only we have people drink less soda, we tax it, we restrict it, whatever. The problem is that, again, that's overly simplistic, and there's no evidence even that if you do those things, it's going to reduce obesity. People, if soda becomes very expensive because it's taxed, they may instead drink chocolate milk, or maybe they'll drink fruit juice, which can have just as many or more calories than soda, or maybe they'll get potato chips, which is not a good substitute. So the problem is that, yes, we can tax soda in a way to make it less available, but there's no guarantee that people drinking less soda is going to reduce the obesity rates. And what's more, I think, again, it takes the focus off what really matters, which is the overall composition of our diets. That's what matters. Again, that's great to cut back on soda. People should for their health. I'm not saying soda is good and people should drink, as much as they want. But the point is that it's not the solution based on the evidence to obesity.
Well, you even mentioned that, we have decreased our consumption of sugar throughout the years, but yet obviously obesity is at an all-time high. So clearly that makes sense that that's not the only culprit for obesity.
Right, that's exactly, and that's an important point, because that's sort of conveniently sometimes omitted from the arguments about sugar being the number one enemy. Yes, many people have heeded the warnings about sugar, which is good, and are consuming less sugar, and sugar consumption has steadily gone down. It's considerably lower now than it was, say, 10 or 15 years ago. And during that time, obesity rates have gone up, continue to go up. So as you say, that should tell us something about the role of sugar.
Right. Well, I do want to get back to this eat less, move more idea, because it's not necessarily wrong, but it's oversimplifying things. Is this the way to go? Is caloric restriction key, counting calories, or intermittent fasting? I mean, is that the way to go?
Well, what I like to say is calories count. Certainly, I think that's undeniable. It's just science. Calories matter, but counting calories often doesn't work. And there's several reasons for that. One is that counting calories is very difficult to do precisely. So first of all, we know that if you look at a food label, you see that giant number at the top, 174 calories, and you assume, okay, well, that's precise. That's how many calories it has. Well, in fact, those numbers under law can be off by as much as 20%. So right there, even if you have a calorie count, it may not be the right number, and often they're an undercount. So that's number one. But the number two, think of all the foods we eat where we don't know the number of calories, whether we go to a party, many restaurants don't have calorie counts. We go to someone's house, we cook food ourselves, and maybe there are apps you can use, but it's very, very hard to sort of deconstruct foods and figure out how many calories you're consuming. So just knowing how many calories you consume is hard. The other side of that equation, of course, is how many calories you're burning. And there are apps, there are online calculators to give you some kind of estimation, but they're at best an estimate. These two are not very accurate. So if you don't know exactly how many calories you're consuming, and you don't really know with great accuracy how many calories you're burning or need to burn to be in calorie deficit, it becomes very difficult to do this calorie math and to control your weight that way. So what I like to say is it's a good idea to have a general idea about calories. By all means, pay attention to them. But I think to focus on trying to count calories for many people is an exercise in frustration. And they end up just banging their heads against the wall and giving up because it's so hard to do. So instead of doing that, I think it's a good idea to focus on, again, your overall diet, your overall eating patterns. And that includes not only the number of calories to pay attention to, but the amount of fiber, because more fiber is going to fill you up. Amount of protein, more protein is going to fill you up. Sugar, we just discussed earlier, is another factor to consider. So less is better. So the point is to look at the food, the diet as a whole, rather than just fixating on calories. And one other thing I would just add is that sometimes when you fixate on calories, you can make choices that maybe seem to be good, but aren't the best for your weight or your health. So one example is maybe you see that the fudge bar has fewer calories than the fruit, so you get the fudge bar. But the problem with that is, A, obviously the fruit's going to be better for your health than the fudge bar. But number two, the fruit's going to fill you up more than the fudge bar. So even if the fruit has slightly more calories than the fudge bar, it's a better option for weight management because it's less likely to leave you feeling hungry in an hour and wanting to eat again.
Mm. Well, what do you think about people that say don't eat fruit? I mean, what do you think about that? Because I mean, I've definitely heard that. Stay away from fruit, it's fattening.
Yeah, well, we hear that all the time. And in fact, what the studies show is that's not true. That fruit generally is actually promotes weight loss, is consistent with a weight-friendly diet and with weight management, successful weight management. And that's because fruit is relatively low in calories. It's low in what we call energy density, meaning there are relatively few calories per ounce in fruit compared to other foods. So we get fewer calories. Also, because it's high, most fruits are high in water and in fiber, it tends to fill you up more, so you're going to eat less later on. And yes, it does contain sugar. Some fruits are relatively high in sugar, but again, because fruit also has the water and the fiber, that sugar is absorbed slowly, is metabolized more slowly, so you don't get the spikes in insulin than you would from, say, drinking soda or eating candy. So it has a different effect metabolically than sugary food. So I think looking just at the sugar in fruit and saying, well, it's sugary just like soda or just like candy, it's the same thing, is a mistake because it doesn't take into effect how it's metabolized differently than those foods with a lot of sugar.
Okay. I remember hearing like if you eat fruit up to like noon, that's an effective way to lose weight. I mean, how do you feel about that? Like digestion, if you know anything about like, is it better to eat it alone? Is that effective?
Yeah, the evidence I looked at for that, there's no evidence that food combining, as it's called, eating fruit either on on an empty stomach or eating it separate from other foods is going to make a difference. And okay. there have been studies to look at this with regard to weight loss and found that there's no difference.
Okay. One thing back to the calorie counting I found interesting is that you mentioned even the way food is prepared can alter its calorie content, right?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. So raw foods the calories are going to be less absorbed, which means you're not going to gain as much weight potentially from those foods than cooked foods. And then on the flip side, we have a lot of highly processed foods, and that's one theory as to why a lot of the packaged foods, chips and cookies, and a lot of the foods in boxes with all the long list of ingredients, the highly processed foods, those tend to be highly processed, and the fact that they are prepared that way and cooked that way really result in our absorbing a lot more of the calories than if we eat whole foods and raw foods. So yes, you're right that cooking foods and the more processed they are can affect how many of the calories in those foods are actually absorbed.
Okay. So do you feel like timing our meals is an effective weight loss strategy? I guess that kind of can go in line with the intermittent fasting, caloric restriction. And you did a great job just talking about, eating at 8 a.m. versus 8 p.m. And can you touch on that?
Sure. We hear a lot about, one of the keys is to eat earlier in the day. So get your calories early in the day. So, and eat a light dinner or eat before 8 o'clock. You hear different rules, but the idea generally is to don't eat heavy meals in the evening and eat more of your food earlier in the day. And so I looked at a lot of that evidence, and what I found is it's interesting because it has to do with trying to time eating to coincide with our circadian rhythm. And we know certain things about later in the day. We may burn fewer calories. Insulin may go up more later in the day, which may have some effect on our tendency to store fat. So there are things that happen with regard to our circadian rhythm and our biology that change throughout a 24-hour cycle that may, in fact, have some impact on our tendency to gain weight by eating at certain times. That said, the evidence is far from ironclad, and it's hard to draw any firm conclusions from it. And what I really criticize is the tendency of some weight loss or diet promoters to make it sound as though we are certain that if only if you eat before 8 o'clock, that's the key. Or if only you eat all your heavy meal at noon and eat only a light dinner, that's the key. And the truth is we can't say that. Everybody's different. And for some people, that's just not realistic. Let's say they don't get off work until 8 o'clock at night. And so what does that mean? If they're going to try to eat dinner early, maybe they end up eating from a vending machine or they go through a drive-through because they're on some kind of deadline to eat early. And so I think what we have to conclude is that there are no hard and fast rules that apply to everybody with regard to meal timing. If it works for you, that you feel better and you find that it works for you to eat early in the day and to eat lighter in the evening, that's fine. But if it doesn't work with your schedule and it's not possible, I don't think someone should assume that, well, this is bad, I'm necessarily going to gain weight, or this is unhealthy. I think that there's too little firm evidence to draw any really strong conclusions at this point about what's true and what's not true with regard to meal timing.
Good to know. Well, let's just move on to exercise and its role on weight loss. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and people often are surprised that I say what I'm going to say because as I said, I'm an avid exerciser myself. My last book was all about exercise and encouraging everybody to exercise. And I like to say that if there were a pill that could do everything that exercise can do, everything from decreasing your risk of heart disease and cancer and diabetes and Alzheimer's to improving your mood and your sex life and everything in between, we'd all be clamoring for that pill. It's the closest thing we have to a fountain of youth. So by all means, everybody should move their body in whatever way they can. So that's a very important message. That said, the one thing that many people, if not most people, look to exercise to do for them is the one thing or one of the things that can't do very well, and that is to help them lose weight. And that's because the kind of exercise that most of us do, which is to go for a brisk walk, to go biking, take a yoga class, all excellent things for your health, are not going to burn that many calories. So they're not going to make that big a dent in your weight. And so what happens too often is that people engage in an exercise program for the primary reason or the sole reason of losing weight. They find it doesn't result in weight loss and they give up on exercise, which is a terrible thing because exercise is so beneficial in so many other ways. So that's a problem. Now, that said, I do think it's important to point out that exercise can have other beneficial effects when it comes to weight. It can help keep weight off. So for people that have lost weight and want to keep it off, exercise, studies show, is very important, regular exercise for keeping that weight off. Also, it can help you avoid gaining weight in the first place. So there, exercise is important. But it's important to go into exercise, managing your expectations, know that while it's extraordinarily important for your overall health, it can be helpful when it comes to keeping weight off. It's probably not going to help much when it comes to taking weight off in the first place.
I do feel like it's an important point to mention that you said even if overweight people exercise, that they are actually a healthier person than maybe somebody that isn't overweight and is not exercising. So it is beneficial, even if you're not seeing weight loss, to keep doing it.
That's a crucial point. That's another crucial point, because even if you don't see weight loss, you are you're in the overweight category, the obese category, you are benefiting your health. Studies show that people who may be at increased risk for certain conditions because of their weight. If they exercise, there's a decreased risk from exercise for diabetes and other conditions. So yes, that's a crucial point. So again, go in to exercise for your health. That's the right, or because you're going to feel better. And regardless of whether the scale changes, keep exercising. I think that's the important point.
You know, I interviewed Herman Ponter, the author of Burn, and he says the same thing. He said his findings are so consistent with what you're saying. It's like exercise is amazing for all these other things, but just not for weight loss. But I do want to talk about something that you brought up in your book that is a good point. I think we should address it, this negative attitude we have towards exercise that might actually keep us from it. We see it as somewhat of a punishment for eating too much or whatever, and then we just don't do it. Whereas you mentioned finding something you enjoy and just doing it for that reason and not focusing so much on the weight loss portion of it.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And, I think it sort of stems from this diet culture formula that we mentioned earlier: eat less, move more. So, calories is about calories in, calories out. And so what people sort of internalize is, okay, well, I overindulged. I ate too much at dinner. I ate too much over the holidays. I haven't been, quote, good about my diet recently. So what am I going to do? I'm going to go to the gym and exercise more. So exactly as you say, it becomes a form of punishment. It becomes sort of a way to compensate for overindulging, which, first of all, as I said, it doesn't work because you don't burn any calories. But it's just, think about the underlying mindset there, right? It's that I've been bad, so I have to go engage in exercise to make up for what I did. So exercise right there becomes a negative thing. It's something that we do when we're bad to make up for overindulging. Instead of, as you say, the way for us to sort of learn to think about exercise differently is, I'm going to do this because it's going to make me feel better. I'm going to feel more empowered. I'm going to feel less stress. I'm going to be able to sleep better. I'm going to be able to deal with my boss better. I'm going to deal with my kids better. I'm going to deal with my spouse better, whatever it may be. And also, I'll feel more empowered, and maybe I'll be able to make better health decisions, better decisions about my eating. So to look at exercise as a way to empower yourself, not as a punishment. And I think that is crucially important. But again, the way diet culture frames exercise is just the opposite. It implicitly and sometimes explicitly frames it as something that you do as self-punishment for being bad.
Right. Is there an amount we should be aiming for, each day, each week? And is one type more effective than the other, or does it not really matter what type we're doing?
Well, the general recommendations for aerobic exercise are people should get at least 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week of moderately intense aerobic activity. That means a brisk walk. It can mean a number of different things, but it means just getting your heart rate up a little bit where you can still talk when you're doing the exercise. You're not so out of breath that you can't talk, but you can talk when you're doing the activity. If you can sing while you're doing the activity, it's not intense enough, but if you can still talk, it's good. So you want to do that, and and again, it's finding something, as you said earlier, that you enjoy doing. By all means, that's crucial. So if you like to hike, if you like to walk, if you like to go to the gym and get on some machines, if you like to go dancing, so there are any number of things. If you want to take classes, whatever works for you, it's finding what works for you. So that's 5 days a week of that. And then in addition to that, strength training, resistance training, doing that at least twice a week. And again, you don't have to go to the gym. So if you don't like going to the gym, that's fine. You can do body weight exercises at home. You can use resistance bands. There are all kinds of great videos that you can find on YouTube to help give you ideas of different ways to exercise, different apps as well. But doing that is important as well. So a combination of aerobic and resistance training is crucial, not only for good health, but also for successful weight management. We know that aerobic activity tends to burn more calories, but also what we get from resistance training is it tends to build muscle. And muscle burns more calories than fat does. So it's important we want to maintain muscle, particularly if you're restricting calories, you want to maintain muscle. So that's why resistance training is all the more important. And also, as we get older, more muscle is important to allow us to continue doing everyday activities and to fend off feebleness. So preserving muscle is crucial, not only for your weight, but also your health. And that's why doing resistance training, I think, is important for both weight control and for your overall health. You're
right. When they look at it as far as longevity or as you're older, I mean, that muscle mass can really save you from deadly falls and other things that might weaken you and your ability to fight off infection and disease.
Yes, and too often when people think of, resistance training or weight training, they think of some musclehead going to the gym and lifting weights and say, well, that's not me, I'm not going to do that. And the point is, it doesn't, that's not what it necessarily is. So again, you don't have to go to the gym, and there are all kinds of ways to do resistance training, but you're absolutely right. It's a crucial part of exercise, which too often, I think, even for people who are, diligent about doing aerobic activity, sometimes don't focus enough on the other part, which is just as important.
Is fasted exercise more effective, or does it matter?
A lot of people think that it is, and they go first thing in the morning and exercise with an empty stomach. But the studies actually show that even though there may be slightly more calorie burning over the short term, meaning a matter of hours, over a period of days or weeks, it doesn't make a difference. So I would say that if people are like me, then I need some kind of energy in my body when I go to exercise. And if I'm going on an empty tank, it's the results sometimes are not so great. So if in fact people find that they do better with no food in their stomach first thing in the morning, there's nothing wrong with that, but they shouldn't expect that necessarily to burn more calories.
All right. Well, you devote a whole chapter towards superfoods, which is also a craze right now. I feel like, you hear about all these things with superfoods. Could you just touch on a couple of the myths associated with superfoods? I know what stood out to me was the apple cider vinegar and maybe the coconut oil. So could you just touch on those real quick?
Sure. Well, apple cider vinegar, we hear all the time that it's one of the keys to weight loss, and there are all kinds of testimonials from people, and people say, oh, there's good science. Well, I looked at the science, and what we found is that apple cider vinegar, there was one study that many people focus on, and it was a Japanese study that found that people who had several teaspoons or tablespoons of apple cider vinegar lost a few pounds more over 3 months than people who didn't consume it. Now, A, that the difference was very, very small between the two groups, and B, the research happened to be conducted or funded, I should say, by a Japanese maker of apple cider, of vinegar, basically. So you have to look at which I do, and the research that I do here is it's always important to consider who funded the study. The issue is that there aren't many other good studies. So that's about the best evidence we have, and there's other anecdotal or other, I should say, circumstantial evidence that maybe apple cider vinegar has some kind of effects on the body in certain ways, but there's no other good direct evidence that leads to weight loss. And so I would say that if people like the taste, which is most people don't, it has a very bitter taste, but for whatever reason you like it, fine. I don't see anything wrong with it. I'm not aware of any harms, except that you do have to be careful. It can, burn the esophagus, so you have to dilute it, obviously. But people like to sprinkle it on their salads or whatever else. But I think to assume that there's some kind of magical food that's going to melt away pounds and get rid of fat, as is often portrayed, that's just simply not borne out by the evidence. And some of the others you mentioned, chili peppers is another one we hear about, coconut oil, same idea, where what happens is that the proponents of these foods sort of cherry pick studies, small studies that usually involve, and sometimes don't even involve weight loss, they'll involve appetite or that involve some other marker, and say, well, look, it works for weight loss. But you have to really look and say, okay, did it really measure whether people lost weight, or did it measure something short of that? And if it measures something short of that, how reasonable is it to conclude that it actually works for weight loss? And so, and sometimes, again, some of these are funded by industry, which for understandable reasons want to sort of, bring out studies that show that their food is good for weight loss. And so, my point overall here is that what matters is is your overall diet. It's the mirror image of what we see with the villains, right? So with villains, it's don't eat this, don't eat that kind of food, don't eat this category of food, because it's the main contributor to weight loss. The flip side of that is these superfoods, whether it's coconut oil or whether it's apple cider vinegar, or whether it's chili peppers, or whether it's avocados, whatever the case may be, that if you eat this food, it will somehow magically help you lose weight. And again, it's oversimplifying. It's boiling it down to one food, one category of foods that's either good or bad, a villain or a hero. And the truth, again, is that it really, what matters is the overall composition of your diet. And too often we see headlines in the news, online, and so forth about studies that show that some food has some kind of miracle properties to help us lose weight. And if you really dig deeply, what you find is that the study was funded by the producer of that particular food. And it's really, it's a marketing deal rather than true science. And so let me just say one other point, and that is, it doesn't mean that these foods are bad. Avocado is a perfectly weight-friendly food. It's a good thing to include in your diet if you like it. Same thing for chili peppers, and fine for our apple cider vinegar. So there's, again, these all can be part, most of them, as of a weight and health, weight-friendly and healthful diet. It's just that don't count on them alone to be magical and have any special properties to burn fat or to peel away pounds.
What about drinking water before you eat? Does it really fill you up, help with weight loss, or just drinking a ton of water in general? I mean, I know we've all heard that.
Yeah, well, there actually is some evidence that drinking water 30 minutes before a meal can be helpful, at least for middle-aged and older people, because it does help fill you up, and so you'll eat less. Now, as for just drinking a lot of water all the time, which some people say, just keep chugging water, there's no evidence for that, either with regard to health or weight. But having a very specific intervention to say, okay, I'm going to drink 8 ounces of water 30 minutes or less before my meal to help fill me up, that could, for some people, be effective to help them eat less.
Okay. What about, is there any effective weight loss supplements that are out? I know, green tea extract, or is there any effective weight loss supplements? And what about, what's the evidence for prescription weight loss medications?
The short answer to the first question is no. We do not have good evidence that any of the supplements on the market work for weight loss. Some may have slight effects for some people. The problem is that many of them have combinations of supplements, sometimes different ingredients that haven't really been tested together. We don't know if they're effective, more effective together, or less effective together. And because supplements are only loosely regulated, the manufacturers are not required to prove their products are effective before they market them, nor are they required to prove they're safe. So we don't know when, it may be that we know that one particular constituent is relatively safe, but when it's mixed with other things like caffeine or something else, no one's really sure in many cases. So you're really taking a chance of not only wasting your money when you buy a supplement for weight loss, but also particularly encountering some kind of harm. So that's true for supplements. With regard to prescription medications, there is evidence that they can work. These are medications that are intended for people who are either in the obese category or in the overweight category with some kind of underlying condition like diabetes. And there is evidence that they can be effective, and some new one particularly that just came out, very effective, helping people lose 15% or more of their weight. That said, there is a flip side to that. They often carry a significant list of potential side effects, and so people have to decide whether it's worth it to them and whether the benefits outweigh those risks. Also, people should keep in mind that several in the past few years have been, after they were introduced and approved and put on the market, they were withdrawn. For example, one for having an increased cancer risk, others for another for increased stroke. So I think that you need to know that these are medications, just like all medications, they can be effective, but they also have side effects, and also the unknown side effects. They're also unknown side effects if you take them long term. And for all these medications, you do need to keep taking them, or else the weight will come back on once you stop taking the medication. So that's an issue too for people to weigh. Again, this is just something that people have to consider. I'm not saying they're right or wrong. It's just that people have to be aware of this and to carefully sort of sort through all this with their healthcare provider.
You're so right. And also back to the supplements and herbs and all of that. I mean, we need to remember that it can be dangerous interacting, mixing these together, and the side effects of prescription medicines combining herbs and supplements with can be dangerous as well.
Very good point. Yeah, and that's something people, even doctors, don't know, and it's often hard to know if you're on prescription medications and you take some supplement and you don't know what's in it exactly or how much is in it. We do know that certain substances can interfere with prescription medications, and so that can be a very large problem.
Well, what is the evidence, real quick, on weighing ourselves daily? Because I think there is some good evidence that it does help you lose weight, right? By just measuring your weight each day.
You're right. And there is evidence, and there are a number of studies that show that people who weigh themselves regularly, as much as every day, are more likely to take weight off and keep it off than people who don't weigh themselves. That said, we also know that there's some potential negative effects, and particularly psychological effects. There are people that it can lead to increased stress. It can lead to low self-esteem. Some people it can lead to or exacerbate disordered eating. So I think that it needs to be a highly individual matter. People need to say, okay, does this help me? if I weigh myself every day, or is it going to have these negative effects? And if it has these negative effects, then people shouldn't feel compelled to weigh themselves. They should say, okay, well, I'm the kind of person where it's best if I use the scale more sparingly. If people do weigh themselves regularly, it's important to keep in mind that day-to-day fluctuations don't necessarily mean anything. We have day-to-day changes in water weight. We have day-to-day changes due to hormone levels changing. So just because you lost a pound or gained a pound or 2 pounds from yesterday doesn't necessarily mean anything about what's happening with your eating or your weight as the way that you're concerned about it. So I think it's important to keep these small fluctuations in perspective if you are going to weigh yourself daily.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. Well, finally, what works? What was your intention for writing this book? What are the main takeaways that you hope will come from it?
Well, I think the main takeaway I want people to have is that number one is that to be skeptical of all these claims we hear, but number two, not to be cynical. And by that, I mean just not to throw up your hands and say, nothing works, this is hopeless, I can't do anything about this. Because I think there are things, I know there are things. And so it's really simplifying, it's cutting through all the noise, cutting through all the complexity and getting back to basics. And what does that mean? It means, as I mentioned earlier, focusing on the overall quality of your diet. And that means a diet that, and I don't even like to use the word diet because it implies it's short term, right? People often think of diet, I go on the diet, I lose the weight, then I go off the diet. So really what I should say is an eating pattern that you can sustain for life, and that is going to include vegetables, fruits, whole grains, nuts, seeds, beans, fish, lean meats, but dairy if you eat dairy, and minimizing highly processed foods, things like chips, crackers, soda, sweets, candy, things like that. Now, notice I said minimizing. It doesn't say that they're toxic or poisonous and you never eat those, because like some of these diets do, because that's not good, that's not realistic. But what it means is that over time, what you want to do is to try to change your eating pattern. So you eat more foods in the first category, the whole foods, and eat fewer in the processed foods. Now that's a long-term process, so it doesn't mean you should expect to do this overnight or even over a week. It's going to take a long time, but that to make gradual changes so that over time you can change your eating habits. And if people can do that, that kind of eating has been shown through studies to be not only optimal for your health, but also for long-term weight management. And again, it's the long-term that matters. And what's good about this kind of eating pattern is there's a lot of leeway. So you can include foods, you can find foods in these broad categories that you like, that will sustain you, that you enjoy eating, and you don't have to force yourself to eat things you don't like. Like I don't like, for example, I don't like cauliflower. I shouldn't have to force myself to eat cauliflower, but there are plenty of other vegetables that I do like that I can eat. And so that's the point, to find what works for you, to find what combinations of foods that fill you up, that you enjoy, that you can keep eating in a diet that you can sustain for your entire life, because that's really what it's all about.
Awesome. And I love how you talked earlier about the food combining, because you could probably have, fish, a potato, and broccoli and not feel bad about it.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that gets back to trying to get around these complicated rules, because so much diet culture is filled with these complicated rules. Don't combine these foods. Don't eat at this time. Only eat this food. Don't eat that food. And I just think that people get overwhelmed with all these rules, which in the end don't really help. And they're hard to follow. And so I think if people can just get back to basics, to focus on the overall composition of your diet, to find a combination of foods that you like and that work for you from these categories, that's what it's all about.
Awesome. Well, I thought I just want to show your book real quick because I love it. And I want to know where people can find out more about you, following you, what maybe you're working on next.
Well, they can find out more at my website, which is healthyskeptic.com. That's the brand I go under. Several of my books focus on, debunking myths about all kinds of issues. The last one, as I mentioned, was about exercise. But they can go to healthyskeptic.com, find out more about this book, Supersized Lies, and previous books. And also, I've created a number of short videos on some of the topics we've talked about today, as well as other topics around fitness and wellness. Short videos, so I invite people, if they're interested, to go take a look at those at healthyskeptic.com. And
are you on social media at all?
Yes, so they can find me on Facebook at Robert Davis Healthy Skeptic, and also on Instagram at Healthy Skept, SKEPT.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for talking with me and sharing all this awesome information. And I just wish you the best of luck with everything and to keep educating us all on all these things.
Well, thank you so much. It's really been fun.